Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the different roles and needs of three of the most popular AR-15 calibers that are being used. And that's going to be obviously the 5.56 Nato, the 6.8 SPC, which is actually now SPC2, and the 6.5 Grendel. Now, these latter two are calibers that people have tried to get introduced to the military and other people have looked at and considered and ultimately didn't go with. But due to, obviously modern sporting rifles becoming insanely popular, there being at least 8 million legally owned AR-15s, these other calibers have developed followings. And so people oftentimes wonder, what's the difference between these things? Like, what do I get out of each one? And when we look at it ballistically, I'm going to break down some of that. Then I'm going to break down the pros and cons from a building, a logistics, and everything else perspective real quick. But I've made a little chart for you guys, which I'll flip in here. And this chart represents the drop rates, energy, everything else of these three calibers in generally their most common and most aerodynamic Sierra Match King round. And we know Sierra Match King is kind of the standard for the industry. Now, some people are going to point out, well, you can also get tip Match Kings now in some of these rounds that will feed to magazine length. They run great in ARs, and that's true, but they're less common and we have a lot less data, and you can't always get all these calibers, obviously, made from those from the factory. We're dealing with purely hand loads. Now, I will point out there are clear hand load advantages to these calibers. So, let's kind of break down what's going on here. Now, we're going to talk about energy and stuff as far as just stopping power on human targets. I understand we get into bigger animals. That's not a good comparison, and oftentimes energy within the same caliber sometimes isn't always the best comparison of stopping power, but it gives us a good ballpark of assuming that basically whichever round at any given range out of these three calibers coming from, same style of rifle, an AR-15, whichever one has the most kinetic energy at any given range is probably more likely to cause more tissue trauma on a target. So if you're talking about a shit hit the fan rifle or whatever, this starts to become pretty important. But this is interesting because a friend of mine who was a Marine Corps marksman, is a competitive shooter, has been in the past, and has been a very, very avid hunter his whole life, owns, half a dozen ARs himself, and he's considering building a 6.5 Grendel. So we actually got into a talk about this the other day, over a beer. And so I wanted to kind of look at some of this for you guys. All right, when you compare these three basic calibers here, and I've plugged in everything in on the Hornady ballistics calculator for you guys. And obviously we went with the 77 Sierra Match King, which is actually used by the military as a designated marksman round. So that's a good baseline for the 5.56. We went with the 123 SMK, which is the most common round for the 6.5 Grendel for precision and target shooting that people are using. And then we went with the 115 SMK because that's about the heaviest one most AR 6.8 SPCs will stabilize. And you can, of course, buy it. Like people like Black Hills and some of these other companies do manufacture that already as a match round. So this gives us a good baseline of comparison because we're using a comparable round that is standard and normal for match rounds for these three calibers. So this gives us, made by the same company, the same projectile design. So this gives us a lot of info to work with. Now people will say the 5.56 has more rounds available, but that's besides the point. We're still using kind of a gold standard here for the 5.56. So when we compare the best performance we can expect out of an SMK, because these are the leaders as far as performance goes, and you start looking at stuff, obviously you look at the first couple hundred yards, and this gets interesting because when you notice, obviously the lowest energy is going to be the 5.56, just flat out. I mean, it has the smallest cartridge, barely, and smallest diameter bullet. So, we have less total energy going on there. Now, the energy is going to be higher at close range with a lighter bullet. I do want to point that out. But we're using something that's made for long range here. And it's important to note that these 77 open tip matches fragment insanely at close range. They do way, way more damage than military ammo does on soft targets. So we'll still stick with this for now. When you compare it, these on the energy, the first couple hundred yards, look at the 6.5, 1,573 foot-pounds at the muzzle, 1,367 at 100 yards. You go to the 6.8, 1726 at the muzzle, so 150 roughly more energy than the other one. 1392. So about 25 more foot-pounds at 100 yards over the Grendel. That's getting really close, but you know what? That is to be expected because the 6.8 was designed as a CQB round, and a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people are like, oh, the 6.8 shoots flatter and more accurate than the 5.56. No, it doesn't. It absolutely does not. As a long-range rifle round, the 5.5 Nato blows the 6.8 out of the water. Now, not as a hunting round, but if you're talking about purely a paper punching round, 5.56 is way more accurate. Less drop, shoots flatter, less wind drift. Not even arguable. The wind drift difference, even at 200 or 300 yards of the 5.56, it has way less wind drift than the 6.8. But, you know, in terms of just terminal ballistics at 100 yards, and particularly at the muzzle, the 6.8 is king because the 6.8 was designed as a CQB round to replace the 5.56. It came out of the same concept of where the 458 SOCOM came from. They needed better stopping power in close, so that's what this round was designed for. And is it? Of course it is. I mean, look at the energy comparison at the muzzle. Anything inside of 100 yards, it dominates. It is the king. But what people need to factor in, you just can't get aerodynamic bullets for it. You've got a fairly slow twist barrel, limited case capacity. The way that everyone shoots this round and the barrels they make for it, it's a CQB round. It's hard to get good ballistic coefficient bullets. I mean, you're running a 277 caliber and you're limited to about 115 is about the most you're going to get. Now, I do know there are bolt action rifle guys pushing like 135s and stuff with faster twist barrels, but you're not seeing much of that in the AR platform. And you know, unless you're going to get custom stuff made and have to redo all your own gas tuning and everything, it's not going to be viable. So we're talking about rifles you can either buy off the shelf or you can build with pre-manufactured barrels and everything else. So yeah, it dominates in close, but you would expect that. It's got a very light for caliber bullet, slightly more case capacity than the 5.56. Yeah, it dominates, mainly because of the lighter bullet. It has way more energy. That lighter bullet even gives it more energy inside of 100 yards to the 6.5, which has the largest case of the three. That's where it reigns. But you start pushing further out, and you start to run into problems. When you start looking at the energy as we go further, I mean, the 5.56 is just dying on the energy level. It just doesn't compete with either of these two at 100, 200, 300 yards on energy. It just doesn't when you look at the chart there. I mean, even at 300 yards, this 6.5 still has over 1,000 foot-pounds. It has what the 5.56 has at 100 in terms of energy. The 6.8, though, by the 200-yard mark, it's starting to fall behind the 6.5 Grendel. You go to 300 yards, the 6.5 Grendel has 100 and what, around 130, 150, something like that, foot-pounds more energy. The 6.5 is destroying the 6.8 by 300 yards. And it gets worse as you go. You go out to 400, and we have 200 foot-pounds of energy difference. The 6.5 is considerably stronger when we get out to 400 yards, and it just goes downhill from there. I mean, again, by around the 600-yard mark, again, over 200 foot-pounds of energy difference on the 6.5. And the 5.56 Nato is, of course, as you go further down there on the energy, it's just dying. I mean, by 700 yards, the 5.56 has less energy than a good 9mm does at the muzzle. You know, we're getting down into energy levels that are less than lethal. But here's the thing. Everyone talks about the energy of the 6.8, but that's only in close. That's up to 100 yards. You start getting 200, 300, 600. The 6.5 absolutely crushes it. Then you start looking at drop rates and everything. The 6.8 just has a terrible drop rate in comparison. It is not a flat shooting round. I mean, look at 500 yards. You have 14.7 MOA of drop. 14.4 for the Grendel. So they're pretty close, but the Grendel's got a hell of a lot more energy. But then you go over to the 5.56. 12.1 MOA. It's flatter shooting. In fact, as you check it all the way across the board, the 5.56 is the flattest shooting of the rounds. You know what that also means? flattest shooting, it's probably going to buck the wind the best. So as long as you're not concerned with maximum terminal ballistics, on paper, through most of the range, the 5.56 dominates. It dominates on paper. Your only concern is, do you have the ballistics to put down a hostile out at long range? You know, let's say if you're going to use this as a precision round in a raw scenario, this is where your 5.56 runs into problems. But you know what? The 77 open tip match has made plenty of kills at 600, 700, even up to 800 yards in the field. It has been used by scout snipers to kill people. You know, and people need to understand that difference. When you're talking about long range, let's say you're in a raw scenario, that's not necessarily a problem. So what? Your bullet only has 300 foot-pounds of energy at long range, but you're outside of their effective range. You hit someone with a bullet that can still fragment, and it does still fragment at that velocity. 1321 at 700 yards, that will still fragment in the open tip match sometimes. So you still have a 77 grain bullet that can still fragment at that distance. They're injured. You really think they're going to close the gap to get closer to you and shoot? Probably not. Is it ideal? No. But when you look at it, even at 600 and 700 yards, it's the flattest shooting of the rounds. Also going to probably have the best wind drift. And that's what people need to grasp. The only advantage the 6.8 has over it is the energy. The 5.56 shoots way flatter than the 6.8. It cuts wind drift better, particularly, that's been noted even in the field at 400 yards and beyond. The wind drift by many marksmen has been noted to be better with the 5.56 than the 6.8. The 6.8 was never designed to be a long range round. And when you look at these ballistic charts, it makes sense. It was designed as a CQB round to replace the 5.56. That was the intent. And it works well for that. And we're going to get into hunting in a minute, though. But as we get further out, let's look at what your maximum range is. What people need to know when you're talking about these long rifle bullets, what happens when they cross the sound barrier? There's a good chance they tumble and go off course. So you lose your accuracy at that point. And these velocities are for generally going to be about 16 to 18 inch barrels. We're not talking about 20 inch or 24 inch barrels or even better rounds, because yeah, there are people who are shooting 5.56s out to 1,000 yards in match. But they're not doing it with a 77 SMK, and they're not doing it with a 16-inch barrel. So we're talking about basically field rifles here. The 77 at these ballistics crosses the sound barrier about 850 yards. All right, 850 yards is going to be your maximum effective range on this round out of a field rifle. After that, the energy becomes largely irrelevant because you're not going to hit shit. Let's just call it what it is. It's going to be very difficult. You might get lucky, but it is going to be luck because you got lucky that the bullet didn't tumble and destabilize when it crossed the sound barrier. The 6.8, even worse. You go over there, its maximum range, just over 700 yards. I'm going to say by about 720, 725, it's going to destabilize. And the drop rate out there is pretty bad also in the wind drift. It's going to be hard to hit anything at really long range. Now, again, we could argue, well, you know, these are carbine field rifles. You aren't expecting to make shots that far. Probably not. But we are talking about the extreme limits of the cartridge in an actual field rifle in a shit-hit-the-fan scenario or any purpose. And then the 6.5 Grendel stays supersonic even at 1,000 yards. 1137, sound barrier at sea level is 1125. You're still 12 feet per second above the sound barrier. It is an actual 1,000-yard round. Now, we can argue the 5.56 is going to shoot a little flatter, but shooting flatter doesn't matter when you're destabilizing. So as far as the actual maximum effective range, the 6.5 wins hands down. Wins hands down. Now, what else do we have going on here? Because when you look at these rounds, people are like, okay, well, obviously the 6.5 Grendel wins hands down. Well, that's also like saying the 308 wins hands down, so we should all go to an AR-10. There are practical elements to this to consider. Obviously, hunting, we've got a big problem. 5.56, yeah, we shoot deer here in Texas, whitetail with it, but it's a medium game round at best. You need very good hand loads, everything else. You mainly take medium game with the 5.56. So again, we're talking about raw shit hit the fan, stuff like that. The 5.56 isn't going to be your best hunting round. That's where we run into a problem. It's still a good combat round. I would say anything up to 700 yards, it's the best paper punching round out of these three. Anyone who wants to argue that needs to look at the numbers. It's going to have the best accuracy. Now, past that, you start getting up 900 to 1,000. Obviously, the 6.5 Grendel is king. It is a better long-range round for extreme ranges. But the 5.56 can't really hunt. So it gets to hunting. The 6.5 Grendel 6.8 SPC work. Now, a lot of people love the 6.8. Has a big following online, big following of hunters. Are people killing elk with the 6.8? Yes, they are. There are guys killing elk at 300 and 400 yards with the 6.8. Effectively killing them. Bull elks, dropping bull elks at 400 yards with a single shot. Clean kill. It's being done. It will get the job done. The 6.5 is a better hunting round. Heavier bullet. More energy, less drop, less wind drift, much higher sectional density. All right, more sectional density plus more energy is a better big game round. Anyone who wants to argue about that just doesn't get it. They don't understand. It's, again, velocity, mass, sectional density. Those are all very, very important. It's got the best velocity at long range over the 6.8, has more velocity, a slightly heavier bullet, and it, due to being a smaller caliber, has a much higher sectional density even on a grain weight per grain weight comparison. Well, sectional density really affects penetration on big game. It affects it a lot. The 6.8 is flat out the best hunting round here, hands down. But, you know, we're getting into relative, oh, what's the best? We can also argue a 300 Win Mag is a better hunting round too. But that's also not an option on this table. So, you know, will it get the job done? Yeah, the 6.5 is better, but if people are killing bull elk at 300 and 400 yards with the 6.8, I think that's more than an effective raw scenario round or should hit the fan round, even if you need to use as a backup hunting cartridge. It's fine. Our downsides are going to be availability, economics, possible malfunction issues. This is the other big factor to consider. Because we know up to 700 yards, 5.56, best target punching round. 6.5 up to 1,000 yards, it beats everything. All right, anything past 100 yards, it has the most energy, most stopping power, all of that. Best accuracy past 800 yards. The 6.8, best energy and close. The 6.8 has the most stopping power in most shit that hit the fan scenario situations you're going to be in. Superior CQB round, superior energy up to 100 yards. Beyond that, though, it falls flat, but it bridges the gap in certain ways. It's still a good hunting round. Still has more stopping power, even up to 500 yards or so than the 5.56. So again, a lot of people would lean in that direction and say, okay, I get that for shit hit the fan. We get into economics, availability, weight of ammo. 5.56 has cheap ammo available. You don't have to shoot match rounds. You don't have to shoot expensive brass. You don't have that option really with these other two. Well, you do with the 6.5. So let's discuss brass and ammo availability. 5.56 is the clear winner. All right, hands down. You have tons of different brass available. You have military brass, and in fact, Lake City brass has been noted to be pretty good for reloading. That's what I use. I shoot sub-MOA groups for you guys on camera with non-match rounds, hand-loaded and used 5.56 brass. All right, I'm making bullets. I'm making bullets for like 25, 26 cents that are shooting sub-MOA. You guys have watched me do it. That's pretty tough to beat. Also, the availability of mil-spec surplus ammo. Cheap ammo everywhere. Cheapest components. The match bullets are cheaper. All right, you can load the best Sierra-tipped Match Kings for less money in Lake City brass and get the most accurate, flattest shooting round, again, up to a certain distance, for half the cost or less that you can load either of these other ones to, with actually not quite as good of bullets. Cost and availability. 5.56 wins hands down. The other two, if you want new brass, there is no military brass. You're stuck with match brass. You are not getting brass for 40 cents a piece for these other two. All right, you're going to be paying 50 cents to over $1 for every piece of brass for these other two. That's reality. Deal with it. So, you know, you're looking at least $1,000 worth of ammo. You're looking at $1,000 worth of ammo for either one of these calibers for a shit hit the fan catch. They're both more expensive to shoot as well. The upside to the Grendel, you can make your own brass cheap. But it comes at a cost. And that's going to be wear on the rifle. That's going to be brass that's not going to last long. Because what is the 6.5 Grendel? It's the 7.62 by 39, the round the AK-47 shoots, next down to a 6.5. A lot of people have found that they can fireform their own brass. They can make their own brass out of 7.62 by 39. They buy used once fired brass, not steel case, but brass 7.62 by 39. That can be obtained pretty cheap, sometimes less than 20 cents a round. They resize the necks. Just, you know, you do a neck resize on it. You can run it through a full resizer, obviously, but for the 6.5 Grendel, but you're resizing the neck. But it's not a perfect round, and you can't load it to high pressure. You load one soft round through it after you've resized the neck, and it'll pop the shoulder out to the correct specs inside the chamber of the rifle. So you use the chamber of the rifle to fireform the round. You get one light round out of it. It's not going to be a max pressure round, but could, in theory, someone make a bunch of cheap plinking ammo that way? Yes, they could for cheap plinking. And for some of their shit hit the fan, they can have that. Now, you're probably going to get about 2 more safe shots out of that round. That's it. You're going to get 1 light shot and 2 decent shots. Otherwise, you are stuck with pretty much match grade brass, expensive brass. So you've got that option, 6.8. You don't have an option like that. You pretty much got to go with expensive brass. That's not in its favor. Now, we come to the other issue, size, weight constraints. 5.56, right? You've got a lighter cartridge, lighter bullet. Even these heavy bullets are 77 grains versus the 115, 123. Bullets weigh 2/3 of the weight. You can carry 50% more ammo for the same weight. All right, shit hit the fan, that matters. Ammo's cheaper, it's lighter. More available. You better have a damn good reason to switch to one of these other two for shit hit the fan. That's where we run into issues. There's a big benefit to going to these lighter standardized calibers. No matter what you think of the stopping power, you can carry more ammo, you can afford more of it, you have more versatility of ammo. You also have the option of really cheap military ammo, hunting ammo, everything else. You are going to be more limited in these other two. You probably do not want to mess with these other two for shit hit the fan unless you are an avid hand loader. Let's just be realistic. But, you know, the same could be said for 5.56 to some extent. Now, where do we run into issues? Everyone would look at this and say, well, the 6.5 wins over the 6.8. I mean, the 6.8 only is better up to 100 yards, and it's marginally better for stopping power. The 6.8 blows it out of the water. Better hunting round, dramatically longer range, more accurate at long range. Where's the upside of the 6.8? More reliable. You can hold more ammo in a magazine, and it's still lighter. The 6.5 has the heaviest round. The brass is heavier. It is the biggest capacity of these. The 7.62 by 39 is a bigger case capacity than these other two, and so does the 6.5 Grendel. It's just that round neck down to a 6.5. The problem is it also has a much larger diameter cartridge. It also requires a banana clip, a curved magazine, because it's not as straight-walled as these other two. So basically, you run into all the problems with the 6.5 that you run into putting your AK rounds through an AR. People make them, but there are occasional cycling issues. All right, not saying some companies and some people haven't got the kinks worked out, but there are kinks to work out with your gas system. With your feeding, it doesn't feed as well always into an AR platform. You're going to run into occasional magazine incompatibility issues. All right, you have more situations to where you can run into malfunctions and error. It's a less proven, less designed system. The 6.5 is easier to set up because it's so much similar to the 5.56 in terms of cycling, gas systems, and everything, and it's more popular. You're going to get reliable systems easier. The other downside, of course, with the 6.8 and the 6.5 is that it's more than a simple change. You know, some things on the AR are easy, everything's interchangeable. With these, it's not just a simple barrel change. You require specific bolt carrier groups and specialized magazines, all right? So that is another strike in their disadvantage. Stuff even like the 458 SOCOM 300 Blackout don't have to deal with. Because they can run a lot of proprietary parts. They can run a lot of stuff that's even mil-spec type parts that are compatible with the 5.56. These other two calibers, even though they have a big following, it's not fully compatible. You do need specialized parts that only work for these calibers, and not just the barrel. It's going to be the bolt carrier group magazines. So you know what? It's hard to say which is the best. You've got to look at all the pros and cons of all of these and decide what's best for you. But what I would say for most people, given the merits of the 5.56, I wouldn't make the jump from 5.56 lightly to either one of these as your main caliber. Because remember, ultimately all you're trying to do is get the most ballistics out of the AR-15 platform with this. I mean, if people want superior ballistics, they don't mind heavier ammo, they don't mind more cost. There's a reason AR-10s and some of those calibers are very, very popular. Because let's be realistic, a 308 and a 6.5 Creedmoor both blow all of these out of the water. If we're going to look at ballistics, none of these cartridges compete with either one of those, but those require a bigger rifle platform to shoot. And I didn't get into 300 Blackout here because the 300 Blackout, it's kind of like even me and my friend were discussing the other day. It's just not really a viable shit hit the fan cartridge in a lot of ways. People can argue about it all they want, but as he put it, it's a 100-yard cartridge. That's what he described it. He's like, I wouldn't trust it to be a 300-yard cartridge. Any of these other three are superior to it for longer range. And for him, he just couldn't justify ever building one. He doesn't see the point, and I kind of don't either, other than as a home defense weapon. You start getting into further range, there's nothing the 300 Blackout has on any of these other three calibers. It's going to be an inferior cartridge, you know, beyond about 100 to 200 yards to all three of these. So it's not even really in the running as far as any of this goes. But, you know, that's just opinion. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.